The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
Reverend Luis León, the rector at St. John's Church at Lafayette Park. Outside of its proximity across from the White House, why has this church become the Church of Presidents?
Well, it started with James Madison. The church was built, started in 1815, completed in 1816. James Madison was the president at the time, and he became a member of this church. And since then, every president has attended this church at one time or more during their administration. So it started with James Madison. The proximity, as the realtors will tell you, location helps a lot. And that's really been the two primary reasons why that would become the Church of the Presidents.
And of course, it is a real landmark. You can't miss it with the yellow exterior. So talk about the building itself and its architecture.
Benjamin Latrobe was the original architect. It's a much smaller building when Benjamin Latrobe built this building. It was only about, I guess, about the third the size of what it is now. And then as the city of Washington grew and there was a need for a larger church, they added what is the front entrance to the church and the balconies for the church to accommodate larger groups of people that were coming to worship here. But originally Benjamin Latrobe was the architect, and it was about a third the size of what it is now.
The altar, the stained glass windows, what do they represent in the church itself?
Well, the stained glass windows at the front of the church are from Chartres Cathedral, and they were commissioned in the 1880s and delivered in the 1880s. And they are very, this one is unusual. The one in the front of the church is unusual because it's the Last Supper as opposed to the Da Vinci model, which is a wide table. This is a very long table. And so it's unusual in that respect. The rest of them are really a series of stained glass windows depicting various events in the biblical narratives. And they're really chosen by whomever makes the donation to have the stained glass window.
When visitors come in this church for the first time, what are their impressions? What do they tell you about St. John's?
The first thing they ask me is, where's the president's pew? There's a pew here, number 54, which is the one where James Madison sat, of course, and that became the president's pew. So they all want to know which is the president's pew, and they all want to go there and have their photographs taken in the president's pew. So that's the first question. Then they'll usually ask me, do I have an episode that I can relate to them about a presidential visit here? And sometimes I can give them a good story from all that.
Well, you have been here for 3 presidents, now your 22nd year. So dating back to Bill Clinton, George
Correct.
W. Bush, now Barack Obama.
Correct.
What do you remember?
Well, I've had a lot of experiences with particularly George W. Bush and President Obama both, and have some good relationships with both of those presidents. President Clinton came here occasionally. His church was really Foundry Methodist Church up the street on 16th Street, and that he would come here on occasion to the early service. But my relationships are, if I'm bold enough to say, my friendly relations are with President Bush more so, and with President Obama more so.
And this book, which is kept in storage, is pretty remarkable. What does this represent, and who has signed it?
This is called the President's Pew, and the tradition started in the 1960s, and then they worked backwards to gather signatures of former presidents. So it's signed by Alice Roosevelt, who was a relative of President Roosevelt. The first president to sign it, that they were actually able to get the president to sign it, was Herbert Hoover, even though he was already out of office. And then Eleanor Roosevelt signed for Franklin Roosevelt. Harry Truman, they took the book to Harry Truman. So they were trying to gather as many signatures of presidents that were alive in the early 1960s. Since then, we've been able to gather the signatures of presidents. Since then, they're all signed that when they come to church for the first time here. When President-elect Trump comes on January the 20th, the book will be out at the entrance of the church, and before he comes in to be seated for the service, we'll ask him to sign the book.
For a normal Sunday service, do you know if the president is going to be here?
It depends on which president it is. President Bush liked to give us a heads up. on Saturday mornings. President Clinton sometimes would give us a heads up, but sometimes we would find out early in the morning. And President Obama lets us know on Sunday morning that he'll be attending church.
So let's talk about Friday. What is going to happen? What is your schedule? And what happens in preparing for President-elect Trump and then inside the service?
Well, the service is really scheduled to be a more intimate service than the one on January 21st at the National Cathedral. So the President's Circle will invite friends, family members, members of the cabinet to attend that service at 8:30 in the morning. And we will have some members of our congregation who will also be in attendance, but the church will not be filled. It'll be a much smaller service than, for instance, the one on the 21st. And what happens is it's a very brief service. It's a morning prayer service. The President's committee is working on choosing lessons, readings, scripture readings. They're choosing who's going to be the speaker that day. And we put basically a framework of a service which we've used with President Bush and President Obama. So it's very similar to what those services were like.
And what is your own sense of history on this January 20th, the day that represents the peaceful transfer of power?
Well, you stated it. As far as I'm concerned, it's just one of the great events in American history that we're able to transfer power peacefully from one president to the next. And I think that needs to be celebrated, regardless of who is getting elected on any cycle. So for me, it's a very exciting time. I love being here. I love being a part of it. It's a thrill and just a great moment, I think, in American, and as part of the American tradition.
When the President-elect, the First Lady, his family enter this church, you greet him at the front door. Have you thought about what you're going to say?
Well, my greeting's very brief because the Secret Service will usher him in very quickly. They don't want the President-elect or any president to be outside the doors of the church for very long. But I will give a very brief greeting. Welcome to St. John's Church, and how delighted we are an honor to have the service here again.
And this church, this altar, what does it represent to you personally, having been here now 22 years?
Gosh, yeah, I've been ordained in the Episcopal Church now for 38 years. This is an unusual church. I've had the experience of working in Charlotte, North Carolina, Patterson, New Jersey, Wilmington, Delaware, and here. I love all four places, although all very, very different congregations. This is a very good congregation, and it's made up of people who check their partisan politics at the door. And I've always respected that. We're able to stay as a congregation and exist in a, I think, hospitable and welcoming congregation because we're able to do that. And I have a great deal of respect for the people of the congregation for being able to do that.
Reverend León, thank you very much for your time.
Mm-hmm. Glad to be with you.